Welcome to this lesson on agreement with me, Elena. In this lesson, we are going to tackle this topic of agreement. What is agreement? Well, there are two main things we need to know about agreement right from the start. Agreement is when a noun and another word in a sentence match each other. Don't worry quite yet too much about what matching means. Just know that that's the case. We're going to keep getting into it. Those other words that are going to match that noun are verbs and pronouns. So what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to break down what it means for a noun and another word to match each other, and we're going to do some breakdown of verbs and pronouns that commonly pop up in agreement questions. All right, let's go ahead and start off with verbs. There are two common verbs that you're going to see in agreement questions. Now, of course, you might see other verbs too, but since these are the verbs that pop up the most, and since they're pretty weird, we're going to take a look at these two specifically. The first one is the verb to be. This verb takes a lot of different forms depending on what tense it's in, past, present, or future. Let's break it down with this little chart. So in that present column, we have I am, you or they are, he, she, or it is. That's the form to be takes in the present tense. For past, we have I was, you or they were, he, she, or it was. For future, it's a little bit easier. It's just the verb to be, but we add will before be every single time to indicate that something is going to happen a little bit later on. So these are the different forms to be takes. We get into this a little bit more in our verb lesson, but for now, just know that you'll see this pop up a lot in agreement questions, and you want to make sure that you're familiar with it. Now, one thing you might notice here is that the verbs change depending on whether or not we're talking about just one person, like I or he or she, or multiple people, like they. Hold on to that little piece of information because it's going to be really important in a couple of minutes. Let's now look at our second verb, to have. Again, we'll break it down with a chart. Present, past, and future. I have, I had, I will have, and so on for every single one of these different tenses. Okay, it's time for our main takeaway. What should we know from looking at these verbs? Verbs change depending on whether they're referring to one person or thing or multiple people or things. Remember how in each of those charts, those verbs took different forms depending on whether they were referring to I or he or she or it doing something, just one thing, or they doing something, multiple people or things? That's really important for dealing with agreement questions. So let's go ahead and take that with us as we keep going through this particular lesson. Now that we've established that there is a difference in how verbs are used depending on whether or not we're talking about one person or thing or multiple people or things, it's time to talk about singulars versus plurals. A singular noun refers to one person, place, or thing. A plural noun refers to multiple people, places, or things. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of options and see if we can figure out if they're singular or plural. First, we've got I, refers to one thing, so it's singular. We refers to multiple people, so it's plural. They, multiple people, plural. She, just one person, singular. Them, that's more than one person, so it's plural. And it, just one thing, so it's singular. These are some common singular and plural pronouns that will pop up lots and lots, so it's important to make sure you're familiar with them. Verbs can also be singular and plural. That's really important to know for agreement questions. Usually, singular verbs have an S on the end. Not always, but usually. And usually, plural verbs do not have an S on the end. Again, not always, but usually. These are the rules verbs follow when it comes to whether or not they are singular and plural. Let's check out some examples. Singular verbs. She works, it moves, I study. Plural verbs. We work, they move, both of us study. Now, look at all of those plural verbs. None of them have an S on the end. Those all follow our rule. The singular verbs, 2 out of 3 have an S on the end, so the rule usually works. Study is one of those weird words that doesn't have an S on the end, whether it's singular or plural. Don't worry too much about that for now. The main thing that we need to remember from this is that usually singular verbs have an S on the end. Usually plural verbs do not have an S on the end. Okay, so what have we covered so far? We know that there's a difference between singular and plural nouns and singular and plural verbs. Next, we need to get into what's called subject-verb agreement. What's that? The subject and verb must agree with each other in number. Basically, what that means is that if we have a singular subject, a singular noun, we need a singular verb. If we have a plural subject, we need a plural verb. The two can't mix. They have to agree with each other. That's what agreement questions are all about. So let's go ahead and try a problem together just to see how this works out. The dog did something to the ground. Well, let's see what our options are here. Sniff or sniffs. See how one of these options, these verbs, has an S on the end and the other doesn't? One is singular and one is plural. So we should ask ourselves, what kind of subject are we dealing with? Well, who's taking the action in the sentence? The dog is. It's just one dog, there's no S on the end, the dog, singular. If we have a singular subject, we need a singular verb. So let's go ahead and look at our options. The dog sniffed the ground. Well, sniff, no S on the end, is plural, and we have a singular subject, so we can't use A. But B, sniffs, has that S on the end. It's plural. The dog sniffs the ground. That's the best answer to this question, and that's the way subject-verb agreement works. Okay, let's go ahead and try another problem together. The children do something with the toys. What are our options? Plays or play, a singular verb and a plural verb. So let's ask ourselves, are we dealing with a singular subject or a plural subject? Well, our subject is children, right? That's the noun in the sentence that's doing some sort of action. Children is plural. It refers to multiple people, multiple children. We need a plural verb. A, plays, has that S on the end. That means that this is a singular verb. So it can't be A. We wouldn't say the children plays with the toys. But we could say the children play with the toys. Answer choice B, because that is a plural verb. So we could circle this as the best answer to this question because it matches the subject. It agrees with it in number. All right, it's time to talk about the next part of our agreement section, pronouns. Now remember, we said that there were two parts to agreement when we first started this lesson. Nouns can agree with verbs, and nouns can also agree with pronouns. A pronoun is a word that replaces a noun. Let's look at some examples. We've got singular pronouns that refer to just one person, and we have plural pronouns that refer to multiple people. Singular pronouns would be words like I, him, he, her, you, me. Plural pronouns would be words like they, us, we, them. Here's the interesting thing though, just so you know. You could be both singular and plural. I could say, hey, you over there, and refer to just one person, or I could say, hey, you over there, and refer to a whole bunch of people. So just keep in mind that you could be singular or plural. Pronoun-Noun Agreement is the thing you'll be tested on when it comes to agreement here, and it's basically exactly the same as Subject-Verb Agreement. The pronoun and noun must agree with each other in number, just like the noun and the verb had to agree with each other in number. So if we've got a singular noun, it has to be replaced by a singular pronoun. And if you have a plural noun, it needs to be replaced by a plural pronoun. Let's go ahead and see how this works. Since the house was built in 1890, something will need to be renovated before the family can move in. Okay, so here's our sentence, here's our answer options, they or it. What we need to do, just like we did with those verb problems, is ask ourselves, what is the subject? What is the noun that is being replaced by a pronoun? Well, there's a couple of nouns in this sentence, right? We've got house, we've got family, but we need to figure out what's being described, what's being replaced. What will need to be renovated before the family can move in? The family probably doesn't need to be renovated before the family can move in. That would be pretty weird. So we can say this is not the noun that's being replaced. But this would make sense, right? Since the house was built in 1890, the house is the thing that will need to be renovated before they can move in, because 1890 was kind of a long time ago. You would probably need new sinks or something. Probably more than new sinks, but I digress. So, since the house was built in 1890, it or they will need to be renovated. Okay, so all we have to do here is ask ourselves, is this singular or is it plural? Well, the house is one thing, so it's singular, so we need a singular pronoun. They, we already know, is a plural pronoun, refers to lots of things, so not a. Be is singular. It. Since the house was built in 1890, it will need to be renovated. And that's how we do pronoun-noun agreement. Let's go ahead and try another problem just to make sure we've got this down. Because the students are on spring break, blank can sleep in for as long as they want. Here are our options, he or they. What we've got to do is determine whether or not we are dealing with a plural or singular noun so that we can decide what pronoun we need. So who can sleep in for as long as they want? The students. It's the only noun in the sentence besides spring break, and presumably spring break is not sleeping in. Students has that little s on the end, so we know it is plural. That means we need a plural verb. Dang it, we need a plural pronoun. That means we need a plural pronoun. So let's look at our options again. He, that's singular, refers to one person, not he. They refers to multiple people. It's a plural pronoun, and it can replace our plural noun. And that's how pronoun-noun agreement works. All right, so we've covered a lot so far. We've talked about what agreement is. We've talked about how subject-verb agreement works. We've talked about how pronoun-noun agreement works. We've done some practice problems. You've worked through this. It's now time to turn to one more thing. And that thing that we are referring to is the tricky problems. So the first kind of tricky problem that you will probably run into is called the plural singular, which I know sounds kind of weird, so we'll break it down a little bit. This refers to some nouns that seem plural, but are actually singular. This just means we have to think really, really carefully about whether or not a sentence is talking about one thing or many things. Let's look at some common examples. The committee decided it needed to hold another meeting. So, committee is a tricky noun, right? It seems plural because presumably there would be a lot of people on this committee, but it's one thing, one committee. So it's singular, and we would refer to it with the singular pronoun it. Let's try another. The team of soccer players is going out to dinner. Now this one is especially tricky because of the addition of the phrase soccer players, right? Soccer players definitely seems plural, but here's the thing. The main noun is the team. Of soccer players just describes who makes up the team, but it's one team, one thing. So we use the singular verb is. Let's look at one more. The group of employees, including Janine, is planning a surprise party. Again, tricky because we've got that employees there, makes it sound like there's lots of people, which obviously there are probably a lot of people in this group, but it's one group, one singular thing. So we use the singular verb is. That's the plural singular. It looks plural at first, but it's really a singular noun. You've got to be on the lookout for those particular kinds of nouns. So whenever you're dealing with any sort of subject-verb, subject-pronoun agreement problems, and you've got a weird-looking noun that looks like it could be plural or it could be singular and you're not really sure, just take the time to really carefully ask, is the subject one thing or is it many things? Let's try a problem to put this into practice. The class blank going on a field trip today. Okay, so what are our options? Are or is. What we have to do is determine whether or not our subject is one thing or many things, singular or plural. So our subject has to be class, right? That's the only real noun that's in this sentence. It's the thing that's taking the action in the sentence. So class, is that one or many things? Well, it's probably made up of many things, many students, but it's one thing, one class. that means we would need a singular verb, right? So are is plural. We wouldn't say the class are going, but we would say the class is going on a field trip because that's a singular verb to match our singular, although plural looking, subject. Let's go ahead and try another problem just to make sure we've got this down. The company needs to increase blank revenue. Do we use their or its? Which pronoun should we use, the singular or the plural? Well, that depends on whether or not we are dealing with a singular or plural subject. So what is the subject? What is the thing that needs to increase revenue? Well, that's the company. Is the company one thing or is it many things? Well, probably a lot of people make up this company, but the company is still just one company. It's a singular noun. That means we need to be replaced with a singular pronoun. There is plural, refers to many things, so not this one, but its refers to just one thing, which means it's a singular pronoun that indeed can replace our singular noun company. Okay, so what we've learned here is that even if some subject in a sentence looks like it's plural, we need to really carefully think about whether or not it's one thing or it's many things, and then choose the verb or the pronoun that corresponds, either it's singular or it's plural. All right, let's sum it all up. Agreement is when the subject and another word match each other. Verbs and pronouns, those other words that have to match the subject, can be singular, refer to one thing, or plural, refer to multiple things. If you have a singular subject, you need a singular verb or pronoun. That's matching. If you have a plural subject, you need a plural verb or pronoun. Watch out for words that seem plural but are actually singular, right? You want to ask if you're dealing with one thing or many things. And that has been our lesson on agreement. Good luck!